Kahani Bar brings you a cocktail of stories in English and in Hindustani. I am Richa, and today's story is from Fauji Heart, a collection of human stories with the backdrop of Indian Army. Written for you by Neerja K, these stories will sometimes bring a smile and sometimes a tear, but they will always allow you to peek into the lives of the human beings who are often hidden behind that stiff uniform. Our story for the day is Angel Without Wings. Havaldar Rajab Ali Khan's house was abuzz with myriad activities. To the casual observer, it seemed that everybody was rushing around doing everything and everyone was issuing orders to everybody else. But to a keener eye, there was no doubt that Jamila, Havaldar Khan's wife, was in complete command of the Zanan Khana, which is the women's section of the house, and Rajab Ali Khan was in full control of the Mardana, which was the men's section. After all, it was their daughter, Shireen Jan's wedding. Shireen was their only child, a fact that magnified the zeal of all in the marriage household. The beautifully decorated house seemed to be bursting at the seams with relatives and friends. Little girls in colourful Garara suits were darting everywhere. Their dainty dupattas were studded with delicate sequins and the edges were trimmed with gota kinari. It made them seem like little fairies floating through the courtyard. Their hands and feet were decorated with fine designs of henna. The jingle of their glass bangles and the tinkling of the bells on their anklets were a wonderful accompaniment to their peals of laughter. Little boys were involved in more aggressive games, like pulling down the strings of marigold that decorated the house and aiming them at each other. Their flower fights periodically drew shouts of admonishment from the elders, who themselves were rushing about like busy bees. Mouth-watering preparations were being cooked in the kitchen for the marriage feast. Their appetizing aroma wafted into the courtyard and mixed with the fragrance of the flowers. The deep, earthy scent of henna and the variety of ithers used by the guests contributed further to create a unique bouquet of smells. The sun was setting fast now. The time for the arrival of the Bharat was coming closer, and Rajab Ali Khan was nervous, just as any bride's father would be. He called out to his wife, "Jamila Jan, Begum," but she could not hear him in the din that surrounded her in the Zanan Khana, across the chilman, the drapes that separate the women's section from the men's. He called out again, a little louder this time, and mercifully one of the women heard him and informed Jamila, "Your husband has been calling out for you. So many years of marriage and he still wants you by his side. Lucky you," she said teasingly to Jamila. It was true. Maybe he valued her more because he had a brush with death that had made him really value life and all that it offered in its fold. Jamila blushed at this remark and ran out, only to bump into her husband. "Pull your reins in, woman," said her husband. "I was told that you were looking for me," said Jamila. Still blushing, she began rearranging the veil over her head. "Yes, indeed I was. Is dear Shireen ready in her bridal attire?" "Yes, just a few finishing touches remain." "Why are you so red in the face, Begum? You look like a bride yourself. You still take my breath away," he said with a naughty smile playing across his lips. "Stop flirting with me, Mia. Your daughter's Bharat will be knocking at your door any moment, and you're busy romancing your wife of 25 years? Right then, someone jostled past them and the magic of the moment was lost. "Yes, Begum. I just want a few moments with you and Shireen before the Bharat arrives. And that is why I was looking for you," announced Rajab Ali Khan. "Is everything all right?" asked his wife. "Oh, yes, yes. Don't worry. Just go bring her to my prayer room. I will be waiting there for you," assured Rajab Ali Khan. "Hurry, we do not have much time," he added. Jamila was a little taken aback, but nodded in affirmation and went in to fetch the bride. Rajab Ali Khan walked across the courtyard to the room where he prayed and offered namaz 5 times a day without fail. But ever since Rajab Ali Khan had returned from the war, he allowed no one into that room. That was why Jamila had been a little surprised at her husband's invitation. She was the only one who would go to the room to clean and dust it. But then, that was before the war. Ever since Rajab Ali Khan had returned from the war, he allowed no one into that room. He cleaned and dusted it himself. He entered the room and knelt on his prayer mat. On the wall, in front of him, was a picture of Mecca and a frame that held a handwritten letter dated some 10 years ago. It was a letter from a daughter to her father. He vividly remembered the day this letter had arrived. He had been posted in the Pratappur sector of Ladakh. It was a frontline Pakistani post that the enemy troops, the Indians, referred to as Helmet Top. His post overlooked the river Shyok, constantly threatening the enemy. Its elevation made it a really formidable post to the Indians, forever keeping them on alert. It was almost a month before the fateful night that this letter from his daughter had arrived. Shireen Jan had just been a child of 12 years at that time. It was the last communication he had with the outside world. He had read and reread the letter at least 100 times in that 1 month. Each time, tears had welled up in his eyes. He had not been home for over a year and a half now. He yearned for his home and the warmth of his wife's embrace. He wanted to hold his daughter in his arms and never let go. In her letter, she had asked him to promise that he would be home for Eid that year. How could he promise her something that he had no control over? Their commanding officer and all the other officers were way down in the plains and had virtually abandoned his post, leaving him alone with just a handful of soldiers to manage as best as they could. Even though their geographical position put them at an advantage over the Indians, their morale was down. They had no direction or leadership. They were fighting just to stay alive in the sub-zero temperature. Every breath was a victory against the cold. Many times, Rajab Ali Khan was convinced that even his bone marrow must have developed small crystals of ice. If this wasn't enough to crush their spirit, they now had to face the other enemy, the Indians. He had heard it over the battered transistor set that one of the boys had with him, that an open war had been declared with India. Pakistan had bombarded a number of Indian airports simultaneously the previous evening. It was the December of 1971. Since then, he had been struggling with the transistor to catch BBC to get the facts right. But he had not succeeded. All other channels of communication were long gone. They could only rely on the pack mules from base camp to carry information, letters and supplies. But the last run had been just a month ago, so that meant almost 2 more months remained till the next run was expected. What was he supposed to do? They did not even have a clear understanding of the events that were unfolding around them. Which side had the upper hand? Were the Indians advancing or retreating? What was expected of him? It seemed that their countrymen had simply forgotten about their existence. He was in command where he should not have been. He needed the planning skills of an officer, but he was just a havildar. He was trained to follow orders, not issue them. He was a daredevil in many ways, but he was not equipped to plan an actual attack or even work out a defense plan. And what right did he have to risk the lives of 21 other men? Moreover, in this vacuum of information, it would be futile to plan or attempt an attack. He drew some comfort from the impregnability of their post. The frontal approach to the post was over a steep vertical rock face. It was impossible for the enemy to attempt any assault from there. The other possibility was the southwest, but it was a tedious and hazardous approach from behind. He wondered if the enemy would dare to cross the river Shyok in this treacherous weather and attempt an attack from there. He dismissed the notion, as it was virtually impossible. That left only the northwest, which was too well guarded by other Pakistani troops. Well, he could only hope that that was still the case. Rajab Ali Khan was very sure that the attack could come only from the northwest, that too only if all the other Pakistani troops had abandoned their posts. If that attack materialized, God alone knew how big the Indian contingent would be. Having completed this rudimentary analysis, he felt somewhat reassured and safer about their position. But all the same, he could not let the men become complacent. The night was pitch dark, and they decided to have an early dinner, as they would not be able to light any fires after sundown. It was a hurried meal. Allah be praised, at least they had huge stores of rations. They did not have to fight on empty stomachs. He ordered all his boys to take their positions. They had no way of knowing when or from where the Indian soldiers were going to attack and in what numbers. All they could do was just hunker down in their bunkers and wait. The events of the rest of that night and the following morning were imprinted on his mind as if in indelible ink. As the night ticked by, there was a growing sense of unease and dread amongst the men, as they did not know what to expect or what was expected of them. Rajab Ali Khan tried for a while to catch any radio station on the transistor in his bunker, but his attempts were unsuccessful, and eventually he gave up. Their weapons were in position and their fingers were on the triggers. They were alert. They were sure that if the attack came, it would come as the night thickened. It was too quiet. The silence was deafening, as if it were the lull before the storm. As time passed and nothing happened, boredom set in. Many of the soldiers started to doze off in fretful snoozes, with their fingers still on the triggers. Not at all a safe situation. But time trickled by in slow motion. Finally, daybreak came and brought with it some relief for the emotionally exhausted soldiers. His men were weary and disheartened by the behavior of their senior officers. Their morale had dipped further in the night, and motivation was sub-zero, literally matching the weather. All of them had been away from their homes and their women for such a long time, and it was Havaldar Rajab Ali Khan's tough, towering Pathan personality that kept them from squabbling over petty issues. Everyone was on edge, and he knew that it was only a matter of time before infighting would erupt. And he wondered if he would be able to control his men if that happened. Havaldar Rajab Ali Khan was now sure that they had nothing to fear, as the enemy would not risk an attack in broad daylight. Confident that the Indians had no ambition to attack this formidable post, he began planning the day for his men. Suddenly, a deafening human cry broke the icy calm. The enemy had attacked. It had happened when and from where it was least expected. The Pakistani soldiers were milling about aimlessly, stretching their limbs after having spent an interminable night, crouching in the dark on high alert. The timing of the attack couldn't have been worse for them. But the direction of the assault was even more shocking. It had come from the southwest, from the river. Havaldar Rajab Ali Khan was in a state of total shock and disbelief. How could the enemy have dared to use that formidable route? It just did not make any sense. The war cry was deafening as the enemy stormed in. He realized almost instantly that the enemy had been around them the whole night, reinforcing their positions. Clearly, they had timed the attack to catch them unaware and had led the assault from the one direction the Pakistanis could have never anticipated in their wildest dreams. Fight would be futile. They did not stand a chance. He recognized these troops. They were from the Ladakh scouts of the Indian Army. He had always believed that they had a bit of that formidable Mongol blood in them. They seemed very calm and zen on the surface, but when challenged, the Mongol blood in them took charge. The enemy seemed to be everywhere all at once. Their battle cries were ferocious and loud. It seemed like 1,000 shouting warriors had descended on them from out of thin air. He could not tell how many enemy troops were charging at them and how many more would follow, but he quickly assessed the situation and decided to surrender. It was not an easy decision to make, particularly for a Pathan, but he knew none of his men stood a chance. He owed it to their families. He signaled to his men to lay down their arms. He was still not sure if the enemy would spare his men their lives, but he needed to give them a chance in the name of Allah. He did not want to die with the blood of his helpless men on his hands. They all laid down their arms and knelt down to pray, perhaps for what would be the last time. He was the last one to kneel, wondering if the enemy would open fire as soon as he knelt. As Rajab Ali Khan bent down and raised his head to look towards the heavens, his gaze stopped at the face he would never forget. There he stood, their vanquisher. No, actually he could not stand and was being held up by two of his men. He was the only non-Ladakhi soldier. He must be their platoon commander. A thin ray of hope glimmered in his heart. He might be able to save his men from certain death after all. The commander seemed to be no more than 26 or 27 years old. Young, lean, tough and handsome. His face was pale and drained of blood. Lines of pain were writ across his handsome face, but he had no visible wounds on him. And that's when Havaldar Rajab Ali Khan's eyes fell on the boots of this handsome young man and he shuddered. The commander's boots had been cut open and his toes were almost bursting out. They were swollen in his socks. Frostbite. Rajab Ali Khan knew that this must have been a gift from the merciless river Shyok. He marveled at the sheer guts of this young officer and the motivation of the bunch of men he had led. Only a young brazen officer could have led these men on such a treacherous assault. It was then that he realized that the enemy was a small contingent of only 23 men. He instantly regretted his decision to surrender. They could have easily finished them off if he had known the number, or known where they were coming from, or when. But the manner in which the assault had been mounted had compelled him to believe that they had been outnumbered and outmaneuvered. His reluctant admiration for the young enemy rose further. In his heart he prayed, "Forgive me, Allah, but I do feel like saluting this enemy." How I wish our officers were half as dedicated. They waited to be shot or spared. Had the situation been reversed, they would have shot each one of the Indians. With the prisoners pretty much matching the numbers of captors, it would be a nuisance and a dangerous undertaking to haul them along as prisoners of war. It was always easier to finish the enemy off rather than take prisoners, especially in a hostile terrain like theirs. So they waited to be shot. The enemy went through the drill swiftly and efficiently. All the arms were taken into custody. Most of them stood guard while a few went to search the bunkers. "Senior-most soldier, step to the front," barked the young enemy. He pushed back the two men who were supporting him and walked independently without faltering. It must have been an excruciating few steps, but the pain reflected neither on his face nor in his bearing. Havaldar Rajab Ali Khan rose quickly and stepped forward, trying to match the military bearing of his enemy. He saw no mercy on the face of the enemy. "Lead me to your bunker," he ordered. Rajab Ali Khan obeyed. As soon as they entered his bunker, the young Indian officer suddenly opened fire. He fired from left to right without aiming at anything in particular. Rajab Ali Khan's heart sank, but he recovered quickly as he realized that it was only a round of precautionary firing. His enemy was making sure that no one was hiding in the bunker. "Sit down, Chacha." Havaldar Rajab Ali Khan sat down on his steel trunk. "Open it." "Open what?" asked Rajab. "Your trunk. What else?" "Janab, there is nothing in the trunk. Just a few clothes and Huzur, my Quran Sharif." "I insist," said the officer. Rajab Ali Khan got up and opened his trunk. One by one, he took out his meager belongings and kept them on the floor of the bunker. First, a shirt, followed by a jersey, then a few odds and ends, and finally a bundle of letters neatly tied with a worn-out string. He lined it all up for inspection. With reverence, he picked up his copy of the Holy Quran, and as he held it in his hands, a sheet of paper slipped out from it and fell to the floor along with a photograph. The Indian officer promptly bent down to pick up the photograph and turned it over. Two large, smiling black eyes stared back at him. Their charm and innocence, together with the ear-to-ear smile, pierced his heart and touched his soul. The girl in the picture must not have been more than 8 or 9 years old. He looked away from the photo and, pointing to the paper on the floor, asked firmly, "What is that paper?" "A letter, sir." "Why is it not with the rest of them?" snapped the Indian. "This is my daughter's letter, Huzur. That is her in the photo," replied Rajab Ali Khan hesitatingly. "Read," the officer commanded. Rajab Ali Khan fumbled and started to unfold the letter, his eyes glued to the enemy's hand that held the photograph of his innocent daughter. He could not bear to see his precious daughter's photo being touched by the filthy fingers of a kafir. Had it been another time, another place, he would have cut that hand off before it ever touched her photograph. But the present moment was different. Under duress, he started to read the letter, which was written in Urdu. "Abu Jan, Salam Alaikum. Today is my birthday. I am 10 years old now. I have grown really tall this year. I reach almost up to Ammi's shoulder, you know. By the time you come home for Eid, and I hope you are coming home this time, I might even fit into her clothes." And he kept reading. Tears welled up in his eyes and his voice choked. His vision blurred and he could not make out the writing through the tears. He paused to wipe the tears from his eyes. He was about to resume reading the letter when a gunshot resounded outside. Rajab Ali froze. Struggling to his feet, the young Indian went out, still holding the photograph of Rajab Ali's daughter in his hand. With a chill in his heart, Rajab Ali Khan wondered which of his men were down. He knew how soldiers could get drunk on the taste of victory and how trigger happy they could get. He was relieved to find that the enemy had only fired in the air to maintain discipline after a couple of his men had shifted in their place. And then he heard the officer's roaring voice. "Not a single shot! We are taking them prisoners. Do you all hear me? From here on, your first duty is their safety till we hand them over to the authorities. And those are my orders." 2 days later, after a treacherous journey down the mountains and through the icy rivers, they were handed over to the Indian authorities. As the handover process began, the young commander came over to Rajab Ali Khan, still hobbling on his frostbitten feet. He slipped his daughter's photo into Rajab Ali's pocket and said, "I do pray that you go home for Eid this year." Tears of admiration and gratitude welled up in the proud Pathan's eyes. And as he watched his enemy hobbling away to the helicopter that was waiting to airlift him to a hospital, Rajab Ali prayed silently, "May Allah be kind enough to save his feet." He feared that both the helicopter and his prayer might be too late. It was quite likely that gangrene had already set in and that the young officer could well lose his feet, partially or even entirely. That was the punishing fate of frostbitten limbs that were left untreated for too long. He could still recall the loud whirring of the blades of the helicopter and feel the cold wind whipping his face when his reverie was shattered by a knock on the door. He was pulled back from the edge of time and in walked Jamila with Shireen Jan, looking beautiful in her bridal dress. She was little shy to face her father in all this finery. "Come in, Beti Jan." Shireen was surprised to see her letter framed and hung next to the picture of Mecca Sharif. She looked at her Abu with a question mark on her face. Rajab Ali Khan put a finger to his lips and signaled to them to kneel. They all knelt down to pray and offer shukran to Allah. And then he said, "Now we have to say a special prayer for that unknown Farishta who came as my enemy, but granted me and my men the gift of life. He was a tough soldier with a heart of gold who could not bear the thought of disappointing a little girl, even if it was his enemy's daughter. I am sure that it was this letter of yours that saved our lives in the war." Silently, they knelt once more and prayed for the well-being of the angel without wings, who dwelled somewhere across the border. This is Richa signing off. Take good care of yourselves till I'm back with the next story.